So at one time, my sister recommended me this anime called Violet Evergarden, with the guarantee that this anime is gonna bring absolute tears with my eyes. After finishing this anime, I realized that this anime is basically Death Parade, as in a story where the main character has a job that carries a lot of emotional weight for the customers. While I certainly cried in Death Parade, and I highly recommend seeing it, and I will admit that with absolutely zero shame, I didn't cry as much on Violet Evergarden, mostly because every episode felt like the anime is struggling to squeeze every last inch of my tears. That being said, there's this one episode concerning a dying mother that nearly got to me because I find it absolutely clever and really damn spectacular. It is a milestone in how much emotional weight an anime can do, and I highly recommend seeing Violet Evergarden just for that one episode alone. The anime is episodic anyway, so if you jump to episode 10, you'll pretty much pick up the story just fine. So go see the anime, especially episode 10, which is just a visual and narrative masterpiece. But moving on from my anime recommendations, let's talk about tears. Not salty internet tears, but real genuine tears that you get when you cry and get emotional on certain stories. It's really hard for me to cry these days. I guess it's because I'm a stiff, apathetic jerk that doesn't really care about anything, but I also notice patterns in animes, movies, etc., and every emotional moments become more and more predictable. Now you can talk about your animes or your movies that give you the tears, but I don't want to focus on that for now. Today I want to focus on the video game tears, and this is a medium that I find incredibly difficult to shed my tears in. Not a lot of video games manage to grab me with the same level of tears that other entertainment media have. The last time I cried on a video game was Persona 4, right near the end, and then there was the very first Walking Dead, and those two end up being in my favorite games of all time, Superstar Tag Team. But other than those two, I cannot recall a time where I shed my tears at a video game. Maybe because video games rarely dive into the emotional side, or maybe because I'm late to the JRPG party. I don't know, but one thing for sure is that if a video game shed genuine tears in me, I would praise it up sky high for making me emotionally invested with the story and characters. And this article seems to agree with me. Why the best video games are the ones that make men cry. Because those video games are successful in making those men to get invested in the storyline and the characters. I think after the cancer that was the last video, I'm expecting an article that is a little bit more heartwarming and wholesome. But this isn't one of them. This is just another manipulative, cancerous article. The outside of your childhood home is dark, except for the dim flicker of a porch light. Inside, everything your family owned is packed into boxes, and all the remaining furniture is draped into ghostly sheets. But there's one sign of life, a handwritten note from your sister Samantha taped on the door, with the explicit instructions: don't go digging around trying to find out where I am. That's Gone Home. You're talking about Gone Home, a walking simulator video game where you play as a character scavenging through your family's empty house where your sister is gone and you need to find out why she left. Gone Home always got a lot of flack from gamers, including myself, for being just a walking simulator that doesn't really have a lot of substance. But even for narrative-driven experience, Gone Home is basically like being the janitor of a theater after hosting a teenage drama play. I prefer to have the story being shown rather than being told. It's the presentation of the story that is a massive problem for the game. But the thing about Gone Home is that I can certainly find a lot of people liking the game, and despite the story's presentation being rather wonky, the story itself can be pretty emotional. Bring your criticisms to Gone Home all you want, but the one thing you cannot deny is that the backlash for Gone Home doesn't really come from the game itself. I mean, sure, the game is a walking simulator and the story is just your typical lesbian coming-of-age story, but those are just your typical critiques for walking simulators. No, the backlash comes from the people who screams at the top of their lungs about how revolutionary this game is. If we're gonna talk about how Gone Home is an emotional experience, that is perfectly fine. You do you. However, if we're gonna talk about how Gone Home is a revolutionary emotional experience, that rings tons and tons of alarm bells. And let me explain to you why in just one paragraph. While Gone Home isn't a new game, it debuted in 2013, it has set a new standard for role-playing video games where the player embodies someone going through a realistic life experience as opposed to anything fantastical, athletic, or violent. In other words, the writer just found out that adventure games exist. This is not a revolutionary thing, writer. Persona 3 was released in 2006, and half of the game is basically a high school life simulator where the player embodies someone going through a realistic life experience. Oh sure, there's something fantastical, athletic, and certainly violent in Persona 3, but you can have emotionally driven storylines and still be fantastical, athletic, and violent. And please tell me this, writer, has there ever been a video game that follows Gone Home standards and be quite successful and well received to this day? I don't think so. Gone Home doesn't really set any sorts of standards, at least the good ones. The only standards that Gone Home sets is how inexperienced do you have to be to write about video games. There is no time limit, and there are no levels or buffed up bosses, the term for a video game villain, to defeat. There are also any sci-fi characters, fancy cars, or, most notably, guns. Rather, the game is filled with complicated surprises, and visually, there are feelings. Lots and lots of feelings. Writer, you don't have to explain what bosses are in video games. I think everyone knows what it is. I also don't get why you have to celebrate video games that don't have sci-fi characters, fancy cars, or most notably guns, because there are tons and tons of video games that don't have those.
For men in particular, video games have been the source of intense explorations of fantasy that has, at times, like in the most obvious example of Grand Theft Auto, felt like an exacerbation of the worst qualities of our culture, a celebration of rape culture and mindless carnage.
A celebration of rape culture and mindless carnage in a fantasy setting, in a fictional video game. I think you missed the fact that action-oriented video games are quite fun to play, and that we as human beings really love to dive into our wild and animalistic thoughts. The writer cited an article explaining why adult men play video games. To make this short article even shorter, the article states the obvious. People play video games to have fun and escape from the world for just a couple of hours, but it's written in the perspective of someone who thinks that you're a loser for doing so. I love that this article is tagged under mansplaining, which just highlights the writer's bias for this entire thing.
However, with a game like Gone Home, where a player embodies a perfectly normal young woman, there's a different skill set involved. Players like Jack Setzer, a tech support agent from Ouran, are practicing empathy, and they are having fun doing it.
Huh. So Gone Home's gameplay is empathy, the passive kind of empathy. If you want more active source of empathy, I recommend FTL.
Setzer, who also plays competitive violence-driven games like Overwatch, has found Gone Home to be a revelatory experience in an industry that is still heavily dominated by first-person shooters and combat missions adventures.
Yes, more and more talks about how Gone Home is revolutionary. It is so revolutionary that video games that try to do the same thing become incredibly successful. Oh wait, no they don't.
While there are some slightly supernatural-less elements to the game, for instance there's a table in the attic with candles and a pentagram, instead of psyching you out with cheap frills or bumps in the night, Gone Home uses diary entries and attention to detail to gently push the player to explore their surroundings.
In other words, Gone Home tells you the story instead of showing it.
In other games, there are usually some other side quests or subplots where I end up empathizing with some characters, but it's not the whole experience the way Gone Home is, Setzer says. I think what separated was that I felt that the characters' emotions and motivations, it made it feel very human. It wasn't like their emotions were just plot devices.
I have a feeling that you don't play a lot of video games, sir.
They say that they landed on the plot of Gone Home not to make a point, but because they thought it was the most interesting story to be told, and it hadn't been done in a game before.
Well, good for you for telling a story that has never been done before in video games. Good for you. Here's a cookie.
When Gone Home first arrived in the market, the only similar game was Dear Esther, a first-person ghost story, but now fans have at least half dozen others, including popular titles like The Last of Us, Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, and Fulbright's second game, Tacoma.
As we have already established, the writer isn't really a fan of video games that much. The writer seemingly forgot that The Walking Dead was released literally last year before Gone Home, and if you're gonna count The Last of Us, might as well count every game with realistic and emotionally gripping storyline before 2013, and there are quite a lot of them. I would even dare to count Heavy Rain on the list, even if I thought the game was quite overly melodramatic.
The Fulbright team's motivations for making a game where players just walk around and explore their environment stemmed in part from their backgrounds designing shooter games. They wanted to make something just as environmentally rich, but without people shooting at your head.
Well, I'm not really judging what type of games you make, but don't you dare selling this game above the $10 price tag. The article goes on to talk about the many fandoms that the game gathered, including fans who draw fan arts and even making songs about it. Now that is a pretty wholesome story. Thank you for brightening my day. The article then talks about a 32-year-old marketing consultant from Brooklyn talking about how the game managed to get the attention of his group of married male gamers. Here's what he has to say on the game.
I had never played a solely narrative-based game before, Kamowitz says. That one represents the best. If a game makes you cry in the end, all the better.
Oh, these poor casual gamers never experiencing The Walking Dead, which is just infinitely better. The next one is a 31-year-old software engineer in Austria who was surprised at how much he enjoyed playing an emotion-driven game. Confirmation bias, The Walking Dead is much better, carry on. This section talks about how the writers of Gone Home researched the story by asking queer women about their experiences on being gay in the 90s. Kudos for the developers on trying to be authentic. This one talks about how the game presents a more realistic experience, and thanks to its realism, people can relate to the experience and can get emotionally attached to the characters. Again, this is nothing new for video video games, The Walking Dead does it much better. Carry on.
According to Pew Research Center, 4 in 10 women play video games compared to 7 in 10 men, but industry experts who spoke with Bustle from this article cited the number as closer to 50% or more, especially when you take into account the fact that mobile games are primarily played by women.
Yeah, writer, it's not just especially, it's only if you count mobile games.
Both Carla Zimonia, Gone Home's co-creator, and Kate Craig, Gone Home's environmental artist, told us how meaningful it's been to hear from players who identify with the characters and haven't seen themselves in games before. Craig says that the user-friendly nature of the game has attracted all sorts of players, even especially unexpected folks like mothers in their 40s, but they weren't expecting its popularity among cis male fans or their effusive positive feedback. We were extremely taken by surprise. It's sort of incomprehensible, Zimonia says.
So you're telling me that cis male gamers can relate to stories of queer women. You're telling me that human empathy is universal. That is indeed a shocking revelation. It's just that once again, these people really need to play The Walking Dead, or Katawa Shoujo, or To the Moon.
While Gone Home was a design with the intent of creating empathy, the medium of gaming is increasingly being deployed by a number of educators and non-profits to bring awareness to their causes, including gender relations. The game Bystander has been used in Chicago high school to teach students about sexual harassment and consent. For instance, UNESCO issued a report in 2016 describing how video games might build awareness for world peace.
In other words, video games have been used for educational purposes. In other words, propaganda. Seriously, you can't tell me with a straight face that a game is made for world peace and not have any sorts of propaganda messages in it. And sorry to say this, but as noble as you are with your causes, these games are not gonna be successful when they have no gameplay in it, and gamers in general don't buy video games to be spoon-fed with propaganda, whether it be about world peace or sexual harassment.
Video games also have something else movies and books lack. Consequences. You can still make choices you feel good about or feel bad about. There's almost a moral component, says Bonnie Ruberg, professor of informatics at University of California, Irvine, and a scholar of queer video games.
I cannot believe I have to repeat this many times. Play Walking Dead. The 2 sequels are completely optional though. They're not great.
This is something Setzer experienced when he played the game Life is Strange, an episodic adventure game where protagonist Max must grapple with the consequences of her ability to rewind time. You have to make the genuinely more wrenching decisions than I've had to make in a traditional game, he says.
Ah, yes, Max has to deal with the consequences of rewinding time, a topic that has been explored not only in depth but also much better in the visual novel Steins Gate, which you can buy on Steam for $30, and the sequel is also available. Okay, writer, I've had enough of your ignorance. I got through this article bit by bit, so I'm gonna do a quick Control F and see if you mentioned Walking Dead just once. No mention? Okay, what about Katawa Shoujo? To the Moon? Come on, writer, mention anything other than Last of Us and Gone Home. And even Last of Us you only mentioned once.
Part of why the success of games like Gone Home has come as such a surprise is because of the sexism and homophobia of more mainstream games, and often the gamers who play them.
I think that's because every single mainstream outlet shilled this game left and right, and people telling everyone and their dogs to play this game, that or maybe this sexism and homophobia you're talking about don't really exist. How can they exist and still have this game to be successful? Perhaps our definitions of sexism and homophobia are radically different, which is very likely since we're dealing with social justice warriors here.
I would love if a bunch of whole dude bro gamers started playing games like Gone Home, even if they weren't in their comfort zones.
Guys, if you want an emotional roller coaster, Gone Home is not my recommendation. I recommend The Walking Dead, Katawa Shoujo, Steins Gate, Persona 4, Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, Ori and the Blind Forest, To the Moon. Actually, let's fill up the comment section with recommendations of games that put you into tears, because this person only knows video games through a very narrow lens.
But in my experience, those gamers often get a hold of these queer games, and either they're really dismissive, or troll their games, or do a lot of homophobic things with it in online walkthroughs.
In other words, gamers have opinions and actions that they do that you personally don't like. Thank you for the breaking news, writer.
It should also be noted that Gone Home and similar emotionally driven games are often created by smaller, independent producers, so their politics have only started to have an influence in the mainstream gaming community.
Oh my god, there was a citation link on the paragraph and it leads to a Kotaku article talking about Overwatch ships. Now, don't get me wrong, I love myself some good old Overwatch ships, and they can certainly lead to some really damn good porns, but you cited this article to highlight that the LGBT politics have influence in the mainstream video game community. Writers, sad to say this to you, but shippers are not part of the LGBT. There are overlaps, sure, but they're not the same thing. I love myself some yaoi/yuri ships, but I'm actually straight. At least the 3D version of me is straight. My 2D version is incredibly flexible. Also, writer, you have successfully switched topics from video games that make men cry into LGBT politics. Please get back on topic.
There's also another factor to consider when asking why Gone Home or its successors like What Remains of Edith Finch have been such a hit with gamers at the same time that sexism and homophobia continue to flourish in the community. Some gamers are just more emotionally open than others.
Writer, I think what you perceive as sexism and homophobia isn't really as bad as you make it out to be. Maybe it's because Gone Home is an emotional game with an engaging and gripping story. It's not the greatest game ever, but it is an effective game that grabs the attention and the heart of a lot of people, regardless of race, gender, and skin color. Am I the only one who feels weirded out by the writer and the people being interviewed feeling genuine surprise that non-queer people feel empathy with characters who are queer? Of course you can feel empathy with characters that are not the same as your sexual orientation. We're human beings. We are capable of empathy. If the concept of human empathy is brand new to you, then I think the mental institutions need to watch close eyes on you.
After all, men, like women, are not a monolith. Each character is unique. Kawowitz and Setzer both cited healthy relationships with women, including female gamers, in their interviews with Bustle, and Acebister says that it's hard to see why gamers are attracted to certain games since everyone comes in different levels of emotional complexity.
And some are less empathetic than others. I want to know how low your opinions on gamers are if you think that most of them are incapable of empathy. This screams total projection.
The only thing that I can say to white people who aren't exactly like the characters in the game are interested in it is that hopefully we did an okay job telling the story, and they could be interested in it like any other story.
Oh, finally, we have someone with a reasonable explanation. You're right, it's the stories that engage people. It's what makes us to relate to the characters. That's all there is to it.
Games like Gone Home might not be a cure for toxic masculinity, but the very real tears shed over its storyline show its grip may be weakening.
What? How is that at all relevant?
So all this time, this article is about weakening toxic masculinity. It's not about celebrating video games that brought men into tears. Nope, it's about making sure that men's masculinity is weakened. Writer, Gone Home isn't the only game that brought people into tears. It's not the only game that grips people's emotions. Persona 4 is about seeking the truth on who you really are. To the Moon is about treasuring your greatest memories. The Walking Dead is about family and survival in the brink of an apocalypse. Katawa Shoujo is about many things depending on the route. There are so many games that bring people, including men, to tears. And yet you mentioned Gone Home, which isn't the worst example, but you use it to prove that masculinity is weakening. Writer, you have an incredibly myopic view of the world of video games and gamers. You have a very condescending and narrow view of men, and presuming that all of them are alphas who don't have empathy and emotions, which sounds a lot like projection. So you know what, writer? I'll leave this article with that. This is an article talking about how men don't have empathy and emotions, written by people who are legitimately surprised that people have empathy and emotions. Welcome to planet Earth, you people. Don't forget to cut off your umbilical cords.